Founded in 1999 by Jason Burks, Retrospec Films is Oklahoma's largest turnkey production company of its kind. On this podcast, we will discuss the pursuit of creating things and the problems we solve by digging up projects across the last 20 years and giving you a glimpse behind the scenes where the magic happens. You're listening to Retrospec Films from the Archives.
Hello, thanks for joining us on Retrospec from the Archives, our in-house podcast where we dig up things from the past and
talk about them.
We talk about them, the problems we solve, creative stuff, and all the things. So today, joining me is Adam Vigil, similar to a candle vigil.
Yeah, you got it.
I try to say it right 90% of the time. And Brandon Forbes Magazine.
Yep. I'm surprised you didn't say Forbes.
Yeah, he's only here. He's actually a trust fund kid. Grandparents own a big magazine. You probably heard of it. Forbes.
I don't even need to be here.
He volunteers here.
I'm just bored.
So anyways, whatever. We have a couple of those on staff.
Yep.
And then let's see who else is here. I'm here. My name's Jason. Today, we are going to talk about a very unique project that we did for our very own state right here in Oklahoma called the Oklahoma Roadtrip. And this project came upon us in 2018 conceptually, and we executed it in 2019 through the summer, and we continued into 2020. And it got held up and stopped by the pandemic. We tried to kind of work it along, and we did eventually finish it. So very unique project. I'll kind of set it up for you. What made this project unique really was the fact that we were going to create 52 episodes on a road trip, traveling the entire state of Oklahoma. In every episode, we would experience food, fun, somewhere to stay. And these episodes would be anywhere from 2.5, 3 minutes to maybe as much as 6 or 7 minutes. At first, it was just tell the story of the place, but then it kind of felt like it needed more angle. So we ended up bringing the crew into it and kind of making it this behind-the-scenes-esque thing.
From craft beer in Muskogee to Ho Chi Town's Heavenly Pizza, this is the Oklahoma Roadtrip, a ziplining, cliff-jumping, heart-pumping journey packed with Oklahoma culture. Stream the full series on travelok.com or youtube.com/travelok.
So let's take it back to square one, which kind of began with Lieutenant Governor Matt Pinnell. Forbes, why don't you take us to the beginning of this concept and how we even thought through its execution?
Yeah, I remember when we were first talking about it, it was, they wanted to release it every week for a whole year. So I was like, okay, so we have to do 52 episodes, and we have to, on average, at first when we were like, okay, we're going to feature, like a restaurant, some sort of lodging, and then something fun to do. It's like, it's all right. Being in Tulsa, northeastern part of the state, we can reach most things within about like a 2-hour drive. But to reach really the entirety of the state, sometimes you're driving 4 or 5 hours one way. And so you're like, okay, so we have to release one of these a week. And on average, they would take 1.5 to 2 days to film. But now we're driving certain places. So now we're looking at maybe 3-4 days that we're gone. And so it's like, okay, how can we try to tag as many of these on as possible so that, like, if you guys are gone for 4 days, you're not just filming one episode. You're filming like 2 or 3 episodes. How many months ahead do we need to get before we're even like posting? If they're like, hey, we want to post January of 2019, it's like, okay, well, we probably need to be like 4 months out on like shooting these because we hadn't no idea yet on how long they were going to take to edit and just kind of figuring out what the process was. Like, obviously, when you're working with a client, there's going to be feedback and revisions, but then when you're working for government, there's just a lot more like hoops to jump through and red tape that you got to make sure you're like, hey, we can't say this, we can't show this. And at the same time, you're promoting these locations that 90% of the time they were offering their services to us for free. If we wanted to rent a boat, they were giving us that boat to use that. And so in turn, they're getting promoted on tourism, but they also want to see what their brand is being represented as. And so there's just all this that you have to think of when it's not just like, oh yeah, we can just go out and like make 52 episodes. It's like, well, hold on. Like we have to make 52 of these, and here's the 5 to 6 week timeline of what it takes to make one of those. And now we need to do that 52 times.
Yeah. And I think, too, like something that was interesting about it for me, and, you know, we all talked about in the beginning and throughout was that was kind of in a time period of Retrospec where we were trying to think more episodically. Like, how can you tell a story well across a large arc? Which is tricky, right? Like it's one thing to make a bunch of individual videos and it's like, here's a video, here's a video, here's a video. It's something else to like have a cohesive thread of storyline. And I remember, you know, when we started doing teasers and having foreshadowing and doing teasers for the next episode at the end. And then as we thought about the entire story arc, it was like we're driving physically across the state. So the story is following this physical road trip. And I guess, did it end up being called Road Trip? Okay, Road Trip.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, isn't that what it was marketed as?
Yeah,
The
it was
Oklahoma
like
Road Trip.
hashtag road trip okay.
Yeah.
So it kind of took a few different, it was like the Oklahoma Road Trip okay.
Yep.
Yeah, it changed titles a
evolved.
couple times, yeah.
Yeah. But I think pressing into that like very comprehensible physical movement as a defining kind of guide thematically like helped me, you know, just going, we're driving from point A to point B to point C to point D, and we're going to travel the whole state of Oklahoma. And, you know, also, you know, as you described it, but this would probably be one of the, I think this at the time, be one of the largest projects from a execution perspective ever. Like some of these episodes would take 2 days.
Yep.
If you're doing 52, you know it's at least 52 shoot days. If sometimes they take 2, all of a sudden it's 104 shoot days.
Yeah.
If you do the math, I think in a year there's 240 something work days if you don't count holidays.
Yeah.
So that's like 50% of our entire work schedule in 1 year is just consumed by this.
Yeah.
So, well, let's talk a little bit about the editorial formula. So, Adam, I know that I think you might have gone on a couple just by default, but generally speaking, you were receiving this footage and trying to make compelling stories that didn't just always feel like hype videos. Talk to me a little bit about that.
So a lot of it was, like you said, in like the broader formatting of it. So even though it wasn't a continuous road trip, we were sending our team out to do like one at a time, maybe like batch, like 3 or 4 at a time. We wanted to make it look like it was one singular road trip that these people were going on.
That's
and it was taking,
Yep.
it was as if they just quit their jobs and then were just
Driving.
doing this thing one day at a time and not, you know, little chunks at a time. So that was kind of our guide when it comes to the formatting of it. And anytime you're doing like 52 of something, you're going to need to establish like templates for stuff so that you know exactly kind of like when the theme song is going to kick in. You already have the music picked for what that is. You want to establish like a uniformity to these things so they're not just like so different and bizarre and like they don't fit with each other. So things like you know, the intros were all kind of the same. I had like the same music picked that would kind of like start the theme and then kind of launch into the theme, and then we would go into like the individual sections, and then in between each thing we would have this map animation that we modeled it to be you know, every year the state puts out like the tourism map. Like you can pick these up at gas stations or state parks and stuff. So we took that exact map and recreated it digitally. And so it was like with all of their notes on it. So it kind of had that feel of like, you know, if you were on a road trip yourself and you picked up that map, it's like, oh, it's the exact map from the show. So little things like that where we kind of unified the branding and the visuals and all of that stuff. Even like the fonts I would use were from their style guides for their like, you know, the outdoor guides and things like that. So getting a lot of that stuff nailed down right away was really helpful. So now I only had to focus on sort of like the little storytelling pieces and the clips and footage that our team would bring back. And it was always, you know, evolving. Like I think we started shooting it on like cinema cameras and kind of doing a more of I guess like more of a personally like laborious like way to do it. Heavy cameras, mics, setting up lights and all that stuff. And then we kind of realized, oh, like this show kind of feels more right if it's like a group of friends going out and doing something. And like if a group of friends are doing something, it's a lot of like cell phone clips and things that are like people laughing and the camera's flipping around and like they're just having a good time. And then maybe that stuff gets paired with like the cinema camera, like the interviews and stuff. And it just feels a lot more authentic that way. So the show was always kind of evolving from that kind of visual standpoint, but also I was trying to do that same thing, but with like some of the editing. Like I remember there was like a restaurant where for that whole segment, all we had was like 2 iPhone clips because that's all we got. So like I had to like make a story out of these 2 iPhone clips for it was like this stop. And so it was kind of leaning more into like a more of a comedic or chaotic editing style, but something that still feels authentic to like a group of friends going to this like Mexican restaurant in the middle of the desert. Yeah. And so it was always kind of like a living, breathing thing, especially when in the middle of this, the pandemic happened. And so if you remember, like all of the entire like global tourism industry shut down.
Yeah.
And so we had to come to a time where we were talking with the tourism department, and we decided to take, I think, like a 3-month break.
Yep.
Because they didn't know how bad things were going to get. Like no one had any answers. So definitely didn't want to encourage people to go out and do stuff at that point, like responsibly.
Right.
So then they finally decided to bring things back, and then we even had that little season of the show, or maybe like 5 to 10 episodes where we had like disclaimers everywhere, like wear your masks. We had a special intro that we had to do.
Yep.
So all of that stuff just gets like added to our post-production template and like the templates that the people were, like you guys were doing on set of like, we are going to wear masks in these locations, and in these locations it's okay because we're outside. And all those variables to juggle on top of all of the logistics of just producing this anyway. And then I think by the time we got to the final, like 50, 52, we were able to finally be so far removed from all of that we can kind of go back to like the original thing. But it definitely, the show just evolved constantly from the start even to like the last few episodes.
And I mean, it took you out for at least, I mean, it was probably a year, almost a year and a half. That's because of COVID and everything.
Yeah. It was basically all I did. That was my one job because we had to have like a 5 to 6 minute deliverable every single week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the calendar, if you go back and look at it, almost every other week there was at least like a 2 to 3 day like shoot being like, and you know, episode 36, 37 being filmed at this time.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was, but you know, we weren't we were still big, but it was like we could do that and just like a group of people go. And now if we were like I think if we could handle that now, like, you know, so much easier. I think back then it was kind of daunting. And then once we got through it, it was like, okay, like, yeah, we could do this.
Yeah. Cause that was still on the cusp of like me debatably trying to shoot everything.
Yeah.
Still, I think that sort of helped launch us into this idea of like teams and multiple teams filming and it not being a big deal.
Well, you had to, like when you said, like when half of your working days are like gone for one project, you're like, okay, we have to like be diverse in the amount of people that are shooting.
There were even times where it was like everyone's out on a shoot or something. I think there was one episode where I was editing and the client really was just, we need this shot. So like I had to like leave my office, like grab a camera and drive to like Muskogee or something and get like some coverage that we just needed for the edit.
Yeah.
And so we were like in the initial stages of like finally spreading out kind of and creating multiple teams. And that was kind of the thing that like kind of by default, I guess with the pandemic too, but like launched us into that kind of stage of Retrospec.
Yeah.
I agree. No, it's funny reflecting because that was like 5 years ago, which is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, that was 5 years ago.
This one's really in the archives.
I know. Well, and I still remember it so vividly, but it's like, it's funny that, I mean, I think we all sort of agree the last 5 years have been a bit of a blur anyways because of the pandemic and then the post-pandemic. And everything changed and inflation happened and real estate went up and just all these things. So we're all just like borderline traumatized and now we're starting to settle a little bit. But it is crazy that it was so long ago. I think that like if there's anything for me like that it proved, because since then we've done a lot of really large projects. I mean, we rolled right into doing Love on the Rocks, you know,
which I think you guys had a lot of verbiage in Love on the Rocks that you guys came up with.
Yeah, we learned from...
Yeah, in fact, Love on the Rocks started in that 3-month break from this show.
Yes.
Because we
Yep.
A lot of our projects and clients didn't want to shoot anything, didn't want to. So, and I had that was my one job, was the Oklahoma Roadtrip show.
Yep.
And so I didn't have anything to do for 3 months. So
Yep.
we started Love on the Rocks in that
Another
time.
road trip show.
Yeah.
Yeah, which worked. It was like, well, Taylor has a Jeep. Here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that like one thing that I like, and I take a lot of pride in like really complex projects, no doubt. But I also, and this was complex, but just kind of for different reasons, because some projects we get hired because they're really, really complicated, right? It's like psycho attention to detail for cinematography, difficult art direction, difficult talent, difficult locations, but still it might be like $150,000 project for a 2-day shoot. You know, that's like a high pressure, hire the best company. That's why we get hired.
Yeah.
But this was kind of unique because honestly, I would say this was like this budget was actually by most standards awful, and I was still proud. I'm not complaining at all. I think what it proved to me was like, wow, look at how efficient we can be. Like, look at how we can create a tremendous amount of content with a low budget because we can develop systems to be efficient, effective, fast, you know, turn it over. Because, you know, I won't talk about the budget, but yeah, like if you divide it out, it'd have been the lowest budget thing we've like ever worked on almost. But like we made it work and it shined, and it is crazy complex. I mean, there's only so many companies, producers, directors, post houses that would ever commit to 52 episodes, 4 to 6 minutes per episode for a freaking entire year straight, and have the confidence to say we can do this.
Yeah.
You know,
And it worked. I mean, the YouTube views, and then I didn't at the end of like I think it was end of 2020. Were you able to see numbers?
They were able to using cookies and chasing click maps and stuff. They were able to see that it had a $42 million impact in that year on hotel bookings inside the state of Oklahoma, which was awesome.
Yeah.
When they sent those reports, and I was like, oh, that's really, really, really cool.
It won. YouTube gave it an award
forgot
for
about
something.
that.
That's right.
I keep that in my pocket.
Huh.
Because
Yeah, that's not strange.
it's not too big, but it's, you know, it's pretty cool.
It is heavy.
It is.
It's very heavy.
Looks dangerous. It's gonna prickly.
Of all the awards we've won, this is definitely the nicest physical award we've ever won.
It really is. The Underdog. YouTube Works
Stainless steel.
2021 award winner, The Underdog. Road Trip OK.
Yes.
Look at us go. And it was random. They didn't even tell us. It just showed up. Remember?
Just showed up.
It was literally just an award, and it was in this
Yep.
beautiful.
Some people have that like golden play button. We have this.
Yeah.
Which I think is a lot cooler.
I agree.
There's still a play button. It's just
There is. Yeah.
not gold. We could paint it gold.
Okay.
Well, cool to talk about that old project, and I'm sure new projects in the future we'll be able to reflect on that and take some of the skills that we learned and translate them to more cool things. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed this podcast, I hope you watch other episodes. We have over 40 now, and you can check them out on our website or Spotify or podcasts.
All the good stuff.
Spotify, Apple Podcast, something. There's a bunch. So we'll see you next time.